then I will share. There you go. I think you have to approve that.
Yeah, got it.
And then if Marilyn comes in, then, we'll introduce her. And if not, then I'll share the recording with her tomorrow. Okay. Have you photographed butterflies?
I have.
Yeah. And what'd you find?
The hardest part, just getting, close enough and not to spook them, and I guess the part, my angle's not always, what direction to shoot them and things like that is the part that I wasn't always sure about. I know, like birds, you get eye level, and and I was thinking similar thing with the butterflies, just trying to get kind of low enough to where I'm not shooting down, shooting more parallel.
Okay. Well, I hope that I touch upon, I'm going to touch upon all of those. And obviously, as I'm talking about something, just always feel free to interrupt. You've been with me long enough to know this. So the places for me to learn about butterflies, number one is the John and Gloria Tweeten Butterflies of Southeast Texas. Do you have that by any chance?
I don't.
No, it's, John and Gloria Tweeten, they were my mentors. And so they taught me photography, natural history back in the 1980s. And then I eventually became John's photo agent. And then when he passed away, Gloria was on one side of him and I was on the other side. But this book, Butterflies of Houston and Southeast Texas, for us here in Houston, this to me is just the definitive book. This is really where I learned butterflies. And in this book, John raised most of these butterflies by hand. So there was always butterflies hatching. There were always eggs. There were always things metamorphosizing the larvae. And so what's in here is primary research as opposed to just copying it from somewhere else. And so that's what I really appreciated. There are things like these little fold out guides so that you can learn your butterflies. And then also iNaturalist.org is a neat thing to use. Are you on there?
I'm not.
iNaturalist is really kind of neat because anybody can put their pictures up and then and their sightings, and then they are verified by other people who know a little bit more about the subject. But what's neat is that being a citizen science project is we're finding out what the real range is for a lot of these butterflies, birds, insects, that type of stuff. And you can put up trees, flowers, beetles, anytime you don't know anything, you photograph it and put it up. So it's a real neat tool. Kaufman book is good on butterflies. I helped work on this one with the photos, and what they did with the Kaufman guide for butterflies is they took various photos and maybe added a wing from this photo to the body of this photo so that you could get a really true picture of what they look like as opposed to just one photograph. You've got all kinds of other guides out there, but for me here in East Texas, it's the Tweeten guide and then the Kaufman guide. The other ones, I think we kind of get buried in all kinds of the national butterflies, but the Kaufman guide is really good if you're going to travel because it does cover all of North America. And so the basics, let's get into butterfly behavior. Then I'm going to talk about getting on eye level with the butterfly, filling the frame with the subject, and then using the various lenses that you've got. So butterfly behavior, one thing that really helps if photographing butterflies or dragonflies is, just like birds, is learning what their behavior is. And so the way that each butterfly acts and behaves is going to help us to be a better photographer. For instance, monarch butterflies will fold their wings when they feed, and they will also open their wings when they feed. And some butterflies never open their wings when they feed, and some butterflies don't fold their wings when they feed. So if we know what a butterfly's behavior is, then it helps us to be better photographers. If we have an area like this for butterflies, then what's neat about it for us as a photographer is that each one of these, say, white flowers Really, the white is not the flower, the yellow is the flower. And there are hundreds of flowers with nectar on the top of each one of these white flowers. Go over to this buddleia right here, and each one of those little purple flowers, each cluster has hundreds of little purple flowers, and each one of those has nectar. Same thing when we come over here to the salvia, same thing over here with the milkweed. So
Right.
each one of the flowers in this garden will keep a butterfly in one place. So we won't be just hopping from flower to flower trying to chase butterflies. Each one of the butterflies is just going to stay in there, which makes it a whole lot easier to photograph.
Right. Right.
So here's lantana, for instance, here's salvia back in here. This is rosemary right in here. So each one of these is going to keep the butterflies occupied in one location for a long time so that we're more able to photograph them. And so that's going to make us a whole lot more successful in our photography. This lantana, for instance, each one of those little blooms is going to keep the butterfly occupied. And our lantanas that we have around here, it's interesting, the pink flowers on the outside of the lantana, the flowers on the outside of the bloom of the lantana are 2 days old, the little blooms. They don't have any nectar. The middle flowers are yesterday, and they don't have any nectar. Only the interior flowers that are today have nectar in them. So when you look at a lantana bloom, the butterfly is going to feed on the center of it. And it's going to suck up the nectar from each one of today's blooms, because those are the ones that have nectar in them. The other ones are all old blooms just to attract the butterfly.
Okay.
So if we know that, then that tells us, okay, so that means we're going to focus our attention on the center of that bloom, because that's where the butterfly is going to end up being. In this case, with these giant swallowtails, the female is on the flower right now, and she is emitting pheromones, and that's why the male is hovering around her. And the female, as she's emitting pheromones, he is trying to get to mate with her. So he's not going to feed, he's just going to hang around her. And if you see this type of behavior going on, then it means faster shutter speed, zoom back out a little bit, because now we've got two butterflies that we're trying to get in the same frame. And then she's feeding while she's doing this. And so that means we can also know exactly where she's going to be. So if we know what the behavior is, then it helps us to be a better photographer. So these Gulf fritillaries, he's already captured her, and she's given in to being mated with. And so now they're going to hook the ends of their abdomens together, and then they're going to sit there for a while. So this means that they're not going to fly around. Rarely will they fly, because she's kind of heavy for him. They will go find some sort of convenient perch, and then they will do their mating thing. So this, once again, tells us they're going to stay still. They're going to stay flat to the film plane, which we'll talk about as we're going along. So if we know that this behavior is going to go around for a while, then this means that we can get a better shot of it.
Right. So Kathy, how close are you to those butterflies there?
I'm pretty close. So I'm about as close as the lens will focus. Now it depends, because it depends on which lens I'm using. So here I'm probably using the 100 to 400 or the 100 to 500. And this allows me to be about 3.5 feet away.
Okay.
And still using the magnification to blow them up.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, they're pretty tolerant of you at this point, but we still don't want to get super, super close to them.
Right. Yeah. 3 feet is probably as close as you can really, for them to be comfortable that you get that close.
Exactly. But sometimes we can get closer. I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit as well. And then also understanding the behaviors. If you see a butterfly flying around its host plant, and every butterfly has its own individual host plant. So we all know that the monarchs use milkweed,
Right.
but Gulf fritillaries use passion flower. The swallowtails use aristolochia, which is Dutchman's pipe. So if you notice that the butterflies are hanging around their host plant, every single female needs to hang around the host plant to be able to lay her eggs. So once she mates, she needs to spend her time around the host plant. And so that's where we as photographers should also spend our times around the host plant, because then we know that she's going to come drop her eggs. If you see her drop an egg, then that's your opportunity to photograph the egg if you want to do that. And this one is photographed with extension tubes on a 24 to 105 lens, so like your 24 to 70, and then a close-up filter on the front. So trying to get as much magnification as I can. And this monarch egg is photographed at 5 times life size. You took the macro class from me, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, I've seen it.
yeah. So this is that real extreme Canon lens that you only use for macro photography,
Right.
that does the 5 times magnification. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I know how small those eggs are. Just amazing.
They are so small. So it was well worth the effort, because I got the photos of it now, but I sure don't want to do it again very often, because it's a pretty hard job. And then realizing too that an adult butterfly, the one that we want to photograph, is only going to live for about 3 days. That's it. That's the extent of its life cycle, or its life. But it spends 2 weeks as an egg, and it might spend 3 weeks as a larvae. And then it only spends 3 days as a butterfly. So we have all these different life stages that we can also photograph, understanding what butterflies are doing. For my monarchs, in the year that I was photographing them, I bought a rearing cage, a cage where you rear your monarch butterflies.
Right.
And it's a little thing you buy from Amazon, and it stands about probably 3 feet tall. It's about 1.5 feet wide square on each side. And I put pots of milkweed in there to protect the monarchs from the birds and the other wasps. Right. And then that way I could photograph them in the pot. So or the milkweed in the pot. So if I wanted to bring it inside and do photography, then I could just lift the pot out, bring it inside, do my photography, take the pot back out.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I built my daughter a butterfly enclosure for the monarch.
Oh, super. Okay. Okay. So you're used to this already. You already know about this one, the milkweed in the pots. Yeah.
Yeah. I got milkweeds. I got several milkweeds.
Yeah. So things like this is a Gulf fritillary, and this is a passion flower vine. So when we're in gardens, when we're in our own garden, when we're in public gardens, when we're in master naturalist pollinator gardens, we hang out around those host plants. And then that way we're able to get the larvae, but we're also able to get the butterflies as they're around those host plants. So a good way for us to be able to find them. And then any nectar producing plant, this is also a great way for us to get around those butterflies. And once again, on something like this sunflower, every single one of these little things in the interior of the flower is really the flower. And these are all full of nectar. So when this admiral gets on this sunflower, it's going to stay there for a while, because this is a little like going to Luby's cafeteria. It could just eat the whole thing, and it doesn't have to go anywhere. So unless it's disturbed or unless it's distracted by something, it should stay on that sunflower for a pretty good amount of time.
Okay. So I'm sorry. At that point, then you're probably just shooting more aperture priority. You're not worried about shutter speed or anything like that.
Not right now, but you still got to make sure you've got a fast enough shutter speed. We'll talk about that when we get to the camera settings. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And then a key thing with butterflies is do not cast a shadow, because on them, remember that they are a cold-blooded creature. So they're in the sun to rev up their metabolism. And if you cast a shadow on them, then that is either a predator or they don't have their sunlight for their solar heating anymore. And so one of the keys is to make sure that you do not cast a shadow on them at all. So as you're approaching them, they are not like a dragonfly, where a dragonfly is a predator, so it will know that you're approaching it. But a butterfly is just watching to make sure that a predator isn't coming. And as long as you don't cast a shadow on it, it's usually pretty good. So just make sure when you're approaching your butterflies that you're approaching them without casting a shadow on them.
Okay.
And then getting down on eye level. Okay, so this means that we've got to squat with that. This means that we've got to focus on flowers that are eye level if we don't want to squat. So the butterfly looks a whole lot better if we photograph it from eye level. I love being in a garden where the plants are relatively high, and especially the pollinating plants are relatively high. So this gives me the ability to not have to squat down too many times. But if we can photograph those butterflies straight at eye level, it makes them a lot more interesting, and it makes the photograph a lot more interesting. So just trying to get as eye level as we can. Here's a little juniper hair streak. And you notice on this hair streaks always face down. Their face faces down. And this little guy has lost his tail. And why he has lost his tail is because there's a false eye on the hair streak bottom of the tail. And then there's also a hair streak that looks like an antenna. So a bird is going to think that that false eye and that antenna are the head of the butterfly. And so instead of hitting the head of the butterfly, they're going to hit, the bird is going to hit the tail and come away with a mouthful of wings.
Right.
Yeah. So hair streaks always face down. And so if you know that, we don't wait for them to face up because they're not going to face up. And also hair streaks have closed wings when they're roosting. So when they're roosting or they're feeding, their wings are closed. And it's only early in the morning when they'll open their wings to bask, to warm back up. But knowing that we can get flat to the film plane and we can get close to them if we know that they're roosting with their wings closed. So this isn't a butterfly where we would try to get it with its wings open. And then we have a lot of the butterflies that also like leaf litter, and they like decomposing wood. And that's what they feed off of, is the decomposing wood and the sap that comes and the minerals that come off of decomposing wood. So in this case, down in the leaf litter, here's the butterfly. So this is going to mean that we've got to squat down and shoot straight across at it. So there's various levels that the butterflies live throughout the garden. And for each one of them, we're just trying to get as much on eye level as we possibly can. And then filling the frame with the subject becomes a real challenge, because we definitely want to fill the frame with the subject as much as we can. Now, this little Riakert's blue, this is only an inch and a half long butterfly. So this is a pretty hard butterfly to get filling the frame. So it's for me anyway, it's one where I'll photograph it first, and then I'll think, well, I'll just crop that. And then if that butterfly stays there, then I'll just keep going closer and closer and closer to it, trying to get it to where it fills the frame. And even something like this Riakert's blue, this is a blue butterfly, meaning when it opens its wings, it's blue inside, and it's in the family of blues. They all look like this. The hair streak family all have the false eye with the little whiskers coming off. The blues also have a false eye back here, once again, designed to draw the predators to the back of the wings. But just knowing that it will stay pretty still with its wings closed, that means I can keep going closer and closer to it until I can maybe get it to fill the frame. Once again, small butterfly, so it's going to be pretty hard to fill the frame with it. And then if I can get it even closer, this is done with an extension tube on the back of the lens. So many times when I go looking for butterflies, I'll just put an extension tube on. Do you have extension tubes from the macro? Yeah.
I do.
So I'll just go ahead and put the extension tube on anyway. And then that means instead of focusing 3.5 feet, I can focus 1.5 feet.
Okay.
And
So
yeah.
the extension tube, do you put how many, just one, the larger one of the?
The larger one's going to be harder because you can get even closer.
Okay.
So for me, the larger one, unless I'm going to look for some small butterflies like blues, the larger one is just going to mean I'm going to have to get much, much closer. But like you're 70 to 200, you can put the big extension tube on that. And now, you know, you can get really, really close with that lens. So try it, see how you do.
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking the 70 to 200 is, that's, I'm going to make it my macro lens now, try to.
And then if you can put an extension tube on the back, now you can get even closer. And that 70 to 200 is ideal as a natural history macro lens, ideal. Yeah, I love that lens. That's a really good lens.
Yeah, I got a tripod foot for it and everything. So.
Exactly. So if we can get closer and closer and closer and closer, it's just working on getting as close as we can, because then we really see the true beauty of one of these butterflies.
Right. Okay.
And then, you know, sometimes we're not going to be able to. So this is a great spotted purple or not a great spotted purple, but a purple hair streak. You can see the little false antennas coming off the back wings. Right. Once again, this is a butterfly that tends to stay more in the trees. And so this is going to be a little bit harder to get super close to because we don't have a ladder. We can't get up in that tree. And so this is one where it's going to be a little bit harder to get as close as we want to, filling the frame. But at least we want to get so that we've got it as big in the frame as possible so that we can see all the beautiful things about it.
Okay.
And then the nice thing about butterfly photography too is we can use any lens we've got. And all of our lenses work. So the 70 to 300 millimeter lens, for instance, is your basic kind of kit telephoto lens, that'll work. 300 millimeter f4, that'll work as well. That's a really sweet lens. Have you ever used that?
Which one was that again?
300 millimeter f4.
No, I have not.
No, now this is an older lens, and Nikon finally came out with a 300 millimeter f4 autofocus. For years, they didn't make a new autofocus lens. You might be able to pick one up used. Okay. And a lot of people don't like using the fixed 300 millimeter, but for me, because this lens focuses to about 3 feet, okay, with 300 millimeters, super light, throw a tele extender on it, throw an extension tube on it. It's a beautiful lens for walking around the garden. Very, very nice lens for walking around the garden.
And then the older one is not autofocus.
It's not autofocus from Nikon.
Okay.
But the newer one is. Now, newer, I'm talking about mid 2015. So, okay, you know, newer lens.
Yeah.
Yeah, not right now. New.
So you would buy the one that autofocuses?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The autofocus and the image stabilization too, or the vibration reduction. Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because it's 300 millimeters. You'd have to have on a tripod if you didn't. Yeah. So your extension tubes, you've already got those. And so the extension tubes just allow you to get closer to a subject. And so where your minimum focusing distance is a foot with one lens, you put the small extension tube on it. And now you can go to like a 1/2 foot. And then if you put the fatter extension tube on it, then you can go maybe 1/4 foot. So these extension tubes are hollow. They don't have any glass in them. And they reduce your minimum focusing distance. So this allows you to get closer to your subject simply because you can move physically closer. Right. These close-up lenses, did you buy one for the macro?
Yes.
You did? You bought one? Yes. So these close-up lenses, even though I'm showing you a Canon close-up lens, you can put that Canon lens on any lens you own. And you buy at 77 millimeters if the opening of your lens is 77 millimeters. Otherwise, you buy it for 72 millimeters or 68 millimeters, whatever the opening of your lens is. These are available on eBay right now. There is a guy out of Japan. I'm doing this for Marilyn's benefit because you've already heard this, Raymond, but there's a guy out of Japan who is selling these brand new. And I think he ended up buying them after the tsunami, because the tsunami that hit Japan destroyed the factory that made these. But they're good. I have people that looked at them yesterday and told me that they're still for sale. And these are nice because you screw them onto the front of the lens. So no taking the lens off the camera, you just screw them onto the front of the lens. And now, once again, you get to get closer with them.
Right. Right.
So a good gadget to have. And I like these close-up lenses in the rainforest, because where it's hot and humid and dirty, I don't have to take the lens off. I can just screw it on the front of the camera. And then you can add extension tubes and close-up filters for super macro photography.
The close-up filter is probably the smaller adjustment of compared to the extension tubes. Is that even the smaller extension tube?
I think so, because an extension tube takes a while to figure out where the zoom is on your lens, and where, as you zoom, where's the minimum focusing distance.
Okay.
Where the close-up filter on the front, once you've kind of zoomed your lens all the way out, then that focusing distance is always the same.
Okay.
Yeah. And the neat thing too is this close-up lens fits on any lens that you have, be it a wide angle lens or a telephoto lens or a medium like your 24-70.
Right.
It fits on any of your lenses. So it's a good thing. So this, for instance, is this is a small little metal mark, and metal marks are named for these little lines that look like they're metal. And this is a small little fatal metal mark out in West Texas. This is a focus stack of 10 images. And your 850 doesn't have focus stacking inside of it. But what I did was I focused on this wing, focused on this wing, focused on this wing, focused on this wing, focused on the head, focused on the thorax. And then I blended those all together.
Okay.
So you just end up taking 7 different pictures or 5 different pictures with different focus points. In this case, it's flat to me, so I'm able to just focus on the edges of the wing. And you see where the software, because Adobe software, Lightroom or Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw does this really, really well. There's a little flaw right there, but I left it that way just so you all can see this. Have you tried focus stacking?
I have. I think we did a little bit in the macro class.
Exactly.
Because I took a picture of a African violet.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So behind the camera, now that's just kind of the way that the butterflies function and the way that they behave and that type of thing. But now behind the camera, you've got to think about your focus point. So your focus point has got to be right on those wings. So luckily the body of a butterfly is in parallel with those wings. Dragonfly, it's a little different because those wings come out, the body is straight, but we've got to focus on those wings with the individual focus point. So I find that with butterflies, one individual focus point works well. Now that I'm doing mirrorless, eye focus works really well because it does find the eyes on most of the butterflies. Yeah, so it does. Yeah. And depending on how the butterfly is, then I might switch over to a one individual focus as well. So just go back to the one point. So some of our butterflies, like the skippers, one wing is horizontal and one wing is vertical. So their wings are held like this, which makes them kind of a 3-dimensional butterfly, and it makes it harder to focus. Sure. So this is once again where I'm going to use one focus point, and in this case, maybe put it on the eye of the butterfly. And why we're using one individual focus point is if we were using a cluster of focus points, then the camera might focus on this flower instead of focusing on the butterfly, or the camera might focus on the leaf. So we just want to use one individual focus point when we're working on butterflies.
Okay.
And then putting that focus point right on the side of the butterfly, right on the wings, and making sure that we're in tight focus on those wings. So, you know, if we had the cluster, once again, it's going to get stuck on the flower as opposed to the wings. So
Right.
making sure that we're using one individual focus point. And I also like continuous focus. So
Okay.
AFC in your camera, and you would
Right.
use the CL or the CH on your Nikon. So the CL for most butterfly photography, but if you did see them moving really fast, like the mating giant swallowtails, then you would use the CH.
Okay.
So continuous autofocus. So I can put, in this case, not on the wings, because then that's going to make the body out of focus. So I'm going to put the focus point on the body of the butterfly, and I try to go on the thorax, the thick part of the butterfly. So the
Okay.
thorax is the thick part. So I try to focus on that because it's big. And then I'm going to use continuous focus, especially on this swallowtail. When swallowtails feed, they hang off of the flower, or they sit on top of the flower and they flutter their wings while they're feeding. So we've got to have continuous focus to keep that focus point on their body, and as they're moving around, photographing them. This is the Mexican something. I forgot its name real fast. Do you know its name, Raymond?
I do not.
I'm not.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I've got it in the front yard and I forget its name real fast. But see, it's only got one nectar flower at a time. And the swallowtails, being a big butterfly, like this because there's a lot of nectar in there, and they have a long proboscis, so they can get down in the throat of that flower. But it's going to move from flower to flower because it's going to suck all the nectar up from that, and it's going to move to the next one. So this is where we've got to make sure that we're on autofocus continuous on this one.
Okay.
And then your depth of field. This is the booger that we've got to deal with. This is the hard thing. So we're trying to shoot with 5.6, 6.8, 8
Okay.
to blur out the background. The further the background is away from the subject, the more we can blur it out of focus. So you know that from your other classes. But the more magnification we have, the narrower the depth of fields are. So you just bought that 2 to 4, right? Is that the lens? 200 to 400?
24, the 200 and 500.
200 to 500. You just bought that 200 to 500. So you've got to realize when you're at 500, you need to be at F8, if not F10, if not F11.
Okay.
And the 200 is okay. I can be at 5.6 or 6.8 or 8. But when you zoom all the way out to 500, your depth of fields have suddenly got smaller, because your depth of field gets smaller the more magnification we have. So if you're out photographing butterflies with that 2 to 500, then you're going to make sure that you're on your F8, F11, or F16 at any given time.
Right.
Go out and photograph butterflies with your 24 to 70, zoomed out to 70, then you're going to be able to be at your 5.6, 6.8, or 8. Your 70 to 200, even though it's a 2.8, don't shoot it at 2.8 because that 2.8 is so narrow, but you're still going to shoot that at 5.6, 6.8, or 8. And the nice thing about your 70 to 200 is that lens is designed to give you a purer background. That's the construction of the lens. So its bokeh is softer than most of our other lenses. So it's nice butterfly lens. Okay. So make sure that your depth of field, that you are using the right f-stop, depending on what lens you're using. And then also we're going to remember flat to the film plane. So the more parallel we can get the butterfly to the back of the camera, because your depth of field is absolutely parallel to the back of the camera, just like we learned in macro class. So if you tilt your camera like this, your depth of field is going to go like this. So whatever way you tilt your camera, that's how your depth of field goes. So we want to make sure that we're using the right f-stop for the butterfly. So this is a little hair streak again, and excuse me, skipper. This is a skipper. Now skippers are the sparrows of the butterfly world. They're all brown. They have very discrete markings, and so they're a booger to identify. But they once again have that flat wing and that parallel wing, and so it makes it a more three-dimensional butterfly. So this one's naturally going to need a bigger depth of field. It's going to need a 6.8 and 8 as opposed to a 5.6. So we've got to keep that depth of field in there. And then if I move more parallel to it and then focus on the back, I've got one wing coming forward toward the camera, which means once again, I'm going to need more depth of field for this butterfly. So much more depth of field when they're more three-dimensional as opposed to when they're flat. And then distance from the background. This is one of those other things that we've got to watch for. So in a garden, I like to concentrate on flowers where I've got a purer background. So the further away the background is from the flower where the butterfly is, the softer we're going to be able to get that background using the depth of field, the f-stop. So like with this mist flower, that blooms in the fall around here in Texas, if I can get them feeding on one of those hanging flowers with a lot of distance in the background, then, this is just lovely for a photographer.
Right. Oh, that is very nice.
Yeah. I love those mist flowers in the fall. They're just beautiful. So understanding that if we've got a cluttered background, or if it's a flower that's cluttered, all of these little sticks and twigs that are catching light in the background are going to be distracting. But the reality is that's just where we find butterflies a lot of times. And so we're just going to kind of move around as much as we can to get that butterfly in as pure of a background as we possibly can. It's not always going to work. And then understand too that just by changing angle, we can change the background. So this is malachite in the Cockerel Butterfly Center with a flower behind it. But if I stood on a bench, it's the same malachite butterfly, but the flower is just slightly moved away from it.
Right.
So squatting down, standing up, standing on tippy toes, moving around, we just got to get that background as close, as pure as we possibly can. And then going back to what you learned in your macro class, flat to the film plane. So keeping that butterfly as absolutely parallel as we can. Now, this is a zebra butterfly, lives up in the piney woods. The stripes on its wings are lime green. It's an absolutely beautiful butterfly, swallowtail. But you see that its body is flat to the film plane. The back of the wing is flat to the film plane. The tail is flat to the film plane. But a little bit of this wing comes forward, so it's blurred. But that's just because when swallowtails, they have such big wings, when they roost with them open or they roost with them flat. So it's a little difficult to get that complete in focus butterfly unless we end up doing a focus stack. So just like we're doing with our dragonflies, you keep the body as parallel as you can to the back of the camera where the depth of field comes from. Or if they're roosting to where you can get the top of the wings, then we would shoot straight down on them.
So in those pictures, you try to just increase your f-stop just so you can get better depth of field as much as you can.
The problem is, even if you go to f/22, you're never going to get that much depth of field with that much magnification. And then you're going to get your background looking more too sharp. Yeah. So it's not even going to get totally sharp at f/22, but it's not worth losing the light, losing the shutter speed, and then you're not going to get that much out of it anyway. So it's better just to work with position instead as much as you possibly can.
Okay.
Same thing with our golden orbs once they start appearing in August, and you know they're a big nice spider for us to photograph if you don't mind them, but we keep it flat to the film plane as much as we possibly can, and then that allows us to get as much of it in focus as we can.
Okay.
So shutter speed, we talked about that. We mentioned that just briefly. Shutter speed really does matter. So your swallowtail butterflies, as I said before, when they feed, they flutter their wings. So the whole time that they're feeding, they're fluttering the wings. He's moving around on this lantana. Every single one of those lantana flowers has nectar in it. And so that means that it's moving from all the lantana blooms. But this one's going to flutter its wings the entire time that it's feeding. So this is easily a 500th of a second, all the way up to maybe, depending on how fast it's feeding and fluttering, up to 2,000 to 4,000.
Okay. Wow.
And when it's hot, it's going to flutter a lot. And so that, you know, luckily we're going to have light. And so that means we can get a faster shutter speed with it as well.
And this shot looks like it was probably late morning, almost midday, isn't it? I mean,
it's almost midday. Now, you know, the nice thing about butterflies is they need the heat. They need the sun. And so most of, other than when they're first opening their wings in the morning and basking to get the heat, that's when you want to get them, you know, when you can get their wings opening up and they're sitting on a rock or something like that to gather the sun's heat. But otherwise, during the middle of the day when they're feeding, they're pretty active. And that's when the flowers are producing their nectar.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's you know, it's where, when they are and where they are. So these swallowtails, they're fluttering their wings, they're opening and closing their wings. So on the swallowtails, we're going to need to get a faster shutter speed to stop those wings. And then stability, your image stabilization, vibration reduction is going to help us a whole lot. But the rule of thumb is this: 60 millimeters needs a 60th of a second shutter speed to eliminate our own body vibration. So if you're holding that 200 to 500, then you're going to have at least a 200th when you're at 200, and you're going to have at least a 500th shutter speed when you're at 500.
Right.
So when we're holding our lenses, we need to think about how much shutter speed we need just to hold the lens. And then if we do end up putting a tele-extender on it, remember that that gives us more magnification, tele-extender with the glass, so the 1.4. If we put a extension tube, no glass, hollow tube, then that gets us closer and we don't have to take that into account. So the extension tubes, we don't have to add in any sort of other thing because of the magnification. Okay. But I'm shooting butterflies now with my 1 to 500, and I put a 1.4x extender on that, which means I'm at 700 millimeters.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that means I've got to have at least a 700th of a second shutter speed to stop my own body vibration. Now, the new lens has better image stabilization, and the new mirrorless also has image stabilization in the body, but I still use it just as a rule of thumb.
Okay. Kathy, I guess a side question really is, like you mentioned the extender, the 1.4 on that lens versus, you know, I've talked to a couple of people recently when I bought my new lens about buying an extender, and they said, given the cameras like the D850, I'm shooting 52 megapixels. Yeah, you're better almost, their point was better to crop than it was to add an extender. I mean, I'm sorry, not the extender, but the multiplier.
That's legitimate. But at the same time, if the ISO is high and the light's not good, now if you crop, that's not going to look really good. So, right. You know, we got trade-offs there. I almost always use a tele extender, especially on my birds. And then if we were in Costa Rica, you went to Costa Rica with me, didn't you?
No, I did not.
No. Okay. So if we were in Costa Rica, and we were around a feeding station, then I might go ahead and throw on a tele extender in that case, because this just allows me to not have to get as close to the birds. It allows me to be a little bit further away, and it gives me a little bit more working distance. So I still On birds, I still use teleextender all the time, even
Okay.
though I've got that big file and I can crop.
Okay, because with 2 to 500, I can put the tele extender on it. It'll just get me to f8, which is still it would work. All my autofocus and everything still would work on my camera body.
Exactly. And that lens is designed, not designed, but it handles a teleextender very well. And yes, it blocks you at f8, but if you think about it, now you're going to be with the 1.7 that Nikon has, you're going to be at close to 700 millimeters. And so you do need an f8 because you have so much magnification.
Right, right. I'm gonna be there anyway, probably. So
yeah, you're going to be there anyway. Exactly. Okay. So your flash comes in really handy with butterflies, because what the flash does is it lights up the little iridescent scales that the butterfly uses to attract mates. We don't see those unless the light's just perfect, which isn't always, but we see them if we do use a flash. So either using the pop-up flash, your 850 doesn't have a pop-up flash, does it? No. Okay. So using your top-mounted flash when we're photographing butterflies. So this allows those beautiful iridescent cells to shine.
Okay.
And we wouldn't see those as well if we didn't use the flash.
So most of your butterfly pictures, you use flash on most of like your pictures you're showing today?
Yeah, this one right here is a flash. And a lot of them have a flash. Sometimes lately, I just have gotten tired of the extra weight of the flash. And so I'm not using it as much. But then I'll get something like that Buckeye and I'll kick myself because then I don't get those little cells to come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So
midday, still use a flash?
Yeah, it might even help with the shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, remember also with your Nikon, you have to move your flash controller to rear on the body of the camera. Remember that?
Right.
Yeah. So I think we got all that stuff worked out a long time ago. But, something like this blue here, it's going to flash in the rainforest when the butterfly hits the sun, but otherwise you don't see it with your eye unless you hit it with a flash.
Okay.
And so that flash just enables you to add that little bit of iridescence. In this case, the butterfly had a shadow on it because the sun was behind it. So using the flash lit up the front part of the wing.
Okay.
And then here's a real good example of this. This is what's called a dog face. And you see the little face of the dog in the wing. Yeah, so the little eyeball and the little poodle face there. Well, this butterfly does not open its wings very often. So children's books always want to use a dog face. Well, dog faces don't open their wings. That's not the way that they feed. They feed with their wings closed. So you only see it when they're flying. But this dog face happened to land so that the sun was coming through the wings. And then I could use the flash on the front of the wings to light those wings up a little bit.
Okay.
So the world of butterflies. So capturing action is hard. But if you can capture the action of the butterfly, it makes the photograph a lot more interesting. So the antennas in action, the proboscis in action, the fluttering the wings when a tiger swallowtail is feeding, this is that Buddleia that they love so much. Then this is what brings the butterflies to life and allows us to show more of their activity, just like we do when birds are more active. So the mating going on of the giant swallowtails. And then also, if you learn the butterfly behavior, you're going to be a better photographer for butterfly photography. So if you know that they come around, wish I could remember the name of this flower. If you know that they love this flower, and by the way, this is a fall bloom for us.
Okay.
And in the fall for us here in the Houston area, we have been through 3 or 4 cycles of butterfly life. So our population of butterflies is much, much more concentrated in the autumn months. So toward the August, September, October is prime time for butterflies here on the east coast of Texas and going into South Texas.
Okay.
You know, sometimes it's interesting because some of my friends up in Massachusetts say, why should I even learn how to photograph butterflies? They just have one season. It's only a couple of months. It's all over with, and that's it. And we have butterflies all year long, but fall is the concentrated. And this type of a flower that's blooming in fall, mist flower that blooms in fall for us, this butterfly can spend the next hour on this bush.
Oh, wow.
And so this just gives, if we understand this, then we just understand that, okay, I can stay here and I can work on blowing the background out and blowing the foreground out. And I can work on moving through this bush and, you know, moving the branches aside with my body if I need to, because he's going to stay on this unless he's disturbed, or it's disturbed for the next 30 or 40 minutes if it needs to. So understanding that type of behavior makes us a better butterfly photography. Zinnias, which are a summer flower for us here, each one of those yellow tubes is the flower, and each one of those is covered in nectar or filled with nectar. The pink is just to attract things. It's not the flower, it's the rays. But butterflies love these zinnias. Where I grew up out in West Texas, a lot of people will just take a couple of packs of zinnia seeds in the springtime and sprinkle them all throughout their front yard, that the grass is going to die anyway because it's so hot. And so they just end up with a zinnia field in their front yard. And my grandmother used to do this. And when I was out in West Texas one day, I drove past a lady's yard that was just nothing but zinnias. And it was like, yeah, that's what grandmother used to do. Yeah. And so I asked her, she was on the front porch, and I asked her if I could photograph her butterflies, because the whole yard was filled with butterflies feeding on zinnias in the sunshine. So if we know that, then that's wonderful, because that allows us to then concentrate. So this sulfur, all yellow butterflies are called sulfurs. They each have different names, but each one of them is called the sulfur. So by the way, in butterflies, it's swallowtails, whites, and whites are all white, different spots. Sulfurs are the yellow ones. So those are sulfurs. Then there's the blues, and they're all little bitty and they're all blue inside, but they're gray outside. Hair streaks have the little false eye and the little hair. And then we get into our brush foots, and that's the fritillaries, and then we get into the skippers, the little brown guys. So that's how they're divided up in the book. So once you understand that, so you can just, for all intents and purposes, call this guy a sulfur, and you're right.
Okay.
But if you want to really get down to its species, then you can call it by its species name. Right. So keep in mind, we're trying to make a photo look better. So go back to your rule of composition, the golden thirds. Mm-hmm. Move your butterflies around so that they're on the intersecting lines of your composition. So make your photograph look a lot better, especially when they're sitting still and you're getting them exactly like you need them. Right. And then also understand that we're trying to show and illustrate with our photographs not only how the butterfly looks, but where it lives. So here it is in mist flower. Once again, you can see the tail intact on this hair streak. See how the false eye is back there and the little false antenna is back there. Yeah. So also just trying to illustrate and communicate to our viewers the life of a butterfly, where it lives, what kind of flowers it feeds on. And here's that same hair streak when he finally opens his wings. And you see, he doesn't do this very often, but when he opens his wings, this is what it looks like when he's inside. So whenever a hair streak or a blue for me, or even a sulfur, because they all feed with their wings closed, when I see them opening up to bask, I'm on it, because they're not going to do it very often. Yeah. And then understanding that that little hair streak is always going to feed with his head upside down, put his little tail up in the air with his little false antennas. And this is a good thing too to show the kids, because it illustrates to them how the butterflies feed. Cone flowers like this that are starting to bloom right now, these are a beautiful place to go and feed and photograph our butterflies, because once again, they're feeding on each one of those little yellow flowers inside that cone flower. So it's got lots and lots of different, yeah. And then Coming into our salvias and our sages, this butterfly is going to move from each one of these little things to feed on it. So they're going to stay there for a while. Thistle does exactly the same thing. There's lots and lots of different kinds of nectar down inside those flowers of the thistle. So that butterfly is going to stay there. This is one of the painted ladies. And it has the eye dots back here. And then this is a hackberry, and hackberries, their host plant is the hackberry tree. So if you're going to find hackberry emperors, then you go to a hackberry tree, and that's how you find hackberry emperors. And they have those dots on the back of the wing, once again, the way that we can identify them down to species. And they're the brushfoots, they're a fritillary, so they will keep their wings closed and open their wings both ways. So if we understand what their world is and what they're doing, then it makes it a whole lot easier for us to photograph them, because we can actually see what they're trying to do, how they're living their lives, and we can illustrate that. This is one of the skippers, and this is one of the dusky wings. They're really hard to identify because you've got to identify them based on these little dots on their wings and what the cluster of dots are. But you see how he's buried inside that cluster of nectar producing flowers. So he's going to stay in there and feed for a good while, which means I can stay there as a photographer and move around. Another another skipper. And this is on the golden dewdrop, popular flower right now. It's just started to bloom. I have one in my backyard, fairly large bush called a golden dewdrop. Do you have one?
I do not.
You do not? Yeah, this is a neat bush. And it once again, each one of those little flower droplets has lots of flowers in it. So the butterfly just stays, and it makes it a really nice plant to photograph butterflies. And then remember that butterflies also do need liquids, and they get the liquids, they get minerals from the liquids by puddling. Now, don't you go up to Colorado or something?
No, I did.
No, not you. I've got you confused with somebody else. Down here, you'll find butterflies in the heat of the day, right along the edge of a pond or a wet area. And some people will even put a dish in the garden, fill it full of soil, and keep the water in it just so that it's lightly muddy. And this allows butterflies to come there and sip nectar out, sip minerals out of those. And in South Texas, where it gets real hot, you'll get a lot of butterflies that are coming down to the edge of a pool of water, and they'll do more nectaring or puddling, it's called. So here you've got a dog face right here. Here you've got a smaller skipper here, a smaller sulfur. Here you got a larger sulfur. So we've got about 3 different butterfly species. There's another one right over here that are coming to this puddle. And this is down in South Texas. So where it's more hot and tropical, South Texas going down into the tropics, you'll notice butterflies do this a lot. It's interesting also that up in the northern part of the United States, Minnesota, any place that there's a piece of bear scat or coyote scat or any kind of animal droppings on the ground that have gotten hot and warm, the butterflies up there just gravitate to that because they start sipping all the minerals out of it. Doesn't happen here. And I asked Tweeten about it because he was a native of Minnesota, and he said he thinks it's because they have such a short lifespan up there that they need more minerals, and so they'll puddle on a pool of water in the road. They'll puddle on scat in the trail, where we just don't see it as happen as much right where we are.
Right.
Yeah, but this once again gives us a chance to photograph them, get flat with them. And then understand too that there are some of our butterflies, these are question marks, that will get on these old logs and they'll sip the sap off of the old logs. So the sap that has or the water that has seeped in and mineralized. And this is during the winter time, because our question marks will come out in the winter, and they have one type of wings for winter and one type for summer. They'll come out in the winter and they'll sip nectar because there, I mean sap, because there isn't that much nectar in the winter blooms. So the world of butterflies, once again, we just know that there's certain flowers that really attract to them, or that attract them. And once we notice those flowers like thistles that they really like out in the desert, then we should hang around those thistles. Here's the Greg flower, or excuse me, the mist flower in the fall. And we get this from the hill country to the central Texas to the Rio Grande Valley. But when that mist flower in the fall starts coming out, we can get wide variety of butterflies on that. So remember too, that perfection is not absolutely necessary. So sometimes we can play around with an abstract. This is a common Nestra, and I was sitting in a photo blind, bored out of my mind because nothing was happening. But this Mestra was just floating on the water. And so I just used a shallow depth of field and played around with the Mestra as it floated around on the water, and had a delightful time photographing it, even though there were no birds coming into the photo blind. So remember that it doesn't have to be perfect. Play around with things like shadows. You know, it doesn't have to be exact every single time. And then remember too, that we can take a plain photo like this and we can add textures to it from the textures class to make it look more like a watercolor or something like that. And by all means, play around with them. It doesn't always have to be a close-up. Include the flower of it and play around with it and see what you get.
Okay.
That's nice. Places that I like to photograph here in the Houston area. I love Mercer Arboretum. It has raised beds so that I can walk on the walkway and the flowers are up higher. So it has raised beds. Houston Arboretum has a butterfly garden in the front parking area, and that's nice also. So I like Houston Arboretum. Be very careful there because there are bad guys who notice you put your camera in your car. So be careful in the Houston Arboretum parking lot. There are parks around town like Terry Hershey Park. That have really, really nice pollinator butterfly gardens. Is that close to you?
It is.
Yeah.
I'm Fry Road and I-10, so that's right there.
And am I right? Are the gardens there still good?
I don't know. I haven't been there.
Okay.
I have to go over there.
Okay, because I haven't been there in a couple of years, so I hope the gardens are still just as good as they've always been. But the gardens are really good there. There are also county extension office demonstration gardens in each one of the counties. So the one in Harris County, I think it's out in Bear Branch Park. Now, I don't know what the floods did to it and all that stuff, but it was a wonderful garden because it had pollinators garden, it had the host plant garden, and it also had a vegetable garden. So we got all different kinds of butterflies in that garden. And once again, it's just kind of a safe place that you can go. So I like that garden a lot. The one up here in Montgomery County is the same way. And the one in Brazos County, Brazoria County is really, really good. Yeah. So down in the Brazoria County area, because the master naturalists down in Brazoria County are super, super active.
Where in Brazoria, where is it?
It's in Angleton.
Angleton.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really, really neat garden. So classes coming up. I think you probably took every class I've given, but you know, other than this one. So classes coming up, you know, let me see. I think you've done all of those already. I've got an opening for the Texas Hill Country at Block Creek. Have you been to Block Creek with me?
I haven't. Is that the one? Is it in November?
There's one in November for fall colors.
Okay.
And then there's one in September for hummingbirds.
Okay.
And the one in September, I can only take one male because there's a 2 bedrooms separated upstairs and there's a shared bathroom and there's one male in one of those bedrooms already.
Okay, that's in September. Okay.
It's Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
In September, if you want to join me. And that's when the hummingbirds are in migration. So we get the thousands of black chins and some ruby throats. And then also that's when we've got mist flower and all kinds of other blooms. So we've got butterflies like crazy on that
Okay,
workshop.
okay,
Yeah.
that sounds nice.
And then the fall color is in November.
Okay,
Yeah, both of those are in the Hill Country. So if you're interested in those, send me an email and I'll send you the brochure on those.
okay. Why don't you go ahead and send me the one on the Hill Country birds?
Okay. I'll send that one to you.
Thanks.
Because it's a good trip. And it's nice because it's only 5 hours from here, 4.5 hours from 4.5 for you.
Okay.
So it's easy. And we arrive on Thursday and we leave on Sunday before noon.
Okay.
So fairly short trip.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then you know all my contact information, so you know where I am. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Questions? Anything I didn't touch on?
No, I don't. So Kathy, as far as the lenses and things like that, probably the 70 to 200 or the 200 to 500. And I guess as far as a tripod, sound like you mostly walk around with the lens.
I walk around. Exactly. And then that allows me to squat, stand up, move around, stay nimble. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I prefer.
Yeah. That's the easier way to do it. So I think your 70 to 200 is ideal. Do you have the 1 to 4?
I do not. I
No.
need to.
Okay.
I need to purchase that.
Okay. And there's a lot of those used ones on the market now, the 1 to 400s. Check with Houston Camera Exchange if you're interested. You just bought that 2 to 5 though, so you really don't need the 1 to 4.
Yeah.
Except the 2 to 5 is heavy, isn't it?
It's not too bad. It's 4 pounds.
Okay.
4 1/3 pounds or
Okay.
something like that. You should be able to carry it. I was looking at the 500 Prime. But it was a F5.6, I think.
Yeah.
Not the 4. It was like 3,600. They had it down to like 3,100 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's even lighter. It's super light.
That's like the little bitty 500.
Yes.
Yes, that is a nice lens.
Okay.
And my guide in Costa Rica carries that all the time. And he puts the extender on it. That is a really nice lens. And I bet you might be able to find a used one of that one also.
Yeah.
Because there are people that are selling their lenses to move into the mirrorless. So I bet you can find that one on used as well at Houston Camera Exchange or Precision. Yeah. Unless you just want to go buy new, you know.
I don't know. It's new is good, but
yeah, I know. If it's lightly used, it can save you some money. Yeah.
No, you're exactly right.
Yeah. And it gives new life to an existing lens. So I always like to see equipment being used.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I'm going to quit recording and I will send you a copy of the recording tomorrow. Okay.
That'd be perfect.
And then Marilyn, we missed you. And then good to see you again.
It was nice seeing you.
Good luck with the bathroom.
All right, thanks.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.